So a big test once again for Nigeria's political parties for control of power on the state level and by extension the control of schools, hospitals, infrastructure and budgets that run into millions of dollars. So for all the political parties, winning the governorship election can be a game changer. Beyond the small affair of looking after all the people in their state, victory can lead to enormous power and influence in Nigerian politics. But the race is a brutally competitive affair. And this time around, there are more than 400 candidates representing different political parties in various fiercely fought ballots. Lagos, for instance, is tipped to be one of the most hotly contested governorship elections, with candidates from the ruling APC, the PDP, the Labour Party, and the likes of the African Democratic Congress, or ADC, and a crop of others in the race. And with just 2 days to go, the parties are making their final pitch to voters. So in that context, I'm joined now from our studios in Lagos by the presidential candidate of the African Democratic Congress, or ADC, it's the governorship election. He's the governorship candidate, not the presidential candidate, of the African Democratic Congress, or ADC, Funso Doherty. And you certainly don't look like the presidential candidate. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Doherty. First of all, tell us why exactly you're running for governor of Lagos State.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I think fundamentally, I think we all recognize that the state of development at the national level and also at the state level, and the fact that we are very far away from where we think we could be relative to our potential, is a function of a failure of leadership. And I think that this is not something that is controvertible. I think most agree. And our sense is that in a democracy, the only way you get to good governance and good leadership is if people who have the character, the capacity, the compassion, and the track record step up, and if the people support them into office. Having had the opportunity to serve in leadership capacities from an early age, and having been blessed by the Almighty with opportunities to develop that capacity, I feel it is incumbent upon me to offer myself for service to the people and let the people make their choice. So that's why I'm in the race.
Thank you for setting out your stall there. So in the context of what you've just told us, I imagine that Saturday's governorship election is something of a sticky wicket for you, to use a cricket term. I mean, how difficult has it been getting your message out in the face of the stiff challenge from your political opponents?
Well, I mean, it's been a keen contest, and this is in line with the expectations. All governorship races are keenly contested. You can imagine that in Lagos, Lagos being the commercial capital, the largest economy, a battleground state that's been held by essentially one ruling party for almost 25 years. You can imagine that it will always be a tough contest. But I think also this is a time when the people understand that they've gotten a raw deal over the last 25 years, that the state, despite propaganda that the state is working, it's only working for a very small number of people, and most people have a quality of life that is far below what it could be. And so people are ready to think about who should govern the state for the next 4 years, and really thinking about the next generation, because we've been governed by one entity for a generation, more or less, 25 years. So I think it's quite clear people are in the throes of making that judgment as we speak. And I think that the outcome on Saturday, will probably take many by surprise.
Well, I suppose you would say that because people are asking what things are like in your ADC camp ahead of the election on Saturday. I mean, Are you optimistic, hoping for a turn of the coin that night that would put you in good nick and improve your chances? Or is it, as some have suggested, your opponents have suggested, all over the shouting?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last. Is it as my opponents suggested that what?
All over but the shouting.
All over but the shouting. So, look, this is a race and a contest that is very open. And the contest is very simple. The choice before the electorate is a simple one. And it's a two-pronged question. First, do they want a continuation of APC that has governed the state for 25 years or 24 years now, with the outcomes that they've witnessed and that they've experienced on a day-to-day basis? And that's the first question. And the second question is, if they do not want the APC, which our campaign over the last 18 months across the state has shown us that the APC is not a very popular government across the state. If they do not want the APC to continue, then the question then becomes, who should govern Lagos over the next 4 years? And in making that judgment, the people will look at the options they're presented with, look at who they believe has the character, the capacity, the track record, and who will deliver on the sacred trust that public office represents. Who do they trust? Who will they entrust Lagos to? The people have proven that this is not an election where they are blindly following parties. People are very interested in who is going to represent them and who they're going to give their mandate. We saw this play out in a big way in the presidential election, even though that is still being contested in certain quarters. But ultimately, people are interested in knowing who is going to govern them. And we've seen that more so in this election than in any other election. And I think when people make that judgment, amongst the front runners in the race for Lagos, I think we're very well positioned.
Well, whilst people are making that judgment and that assessment, obviously the voters are concerned about issues that affect them in Lagos. And I wonder what your solutions are to those problems. And what you identify as those key concerns. I mean, are there things like perhaps traffic jams, flooding, housing, public transport, and of course the worrying issues that rear up during elections, such as ethnicity and violence?
One of the things which we did in the course of our campaign was that we went across the state, across the local governments, and we actually conducted consultative town halls with the people. And we had a cross-section of our people, and we essentially had dialogues with them to understand what their pain points were. And a number of things came across quite consistently from local government to local government. But the outcome of this exercise, together with our own thinking around what Lagos needs, is what we distilled into what we have called our Tiger Agenda for Lagos, which we've been talking about since last year. And that Tiger Agenda, I think, neatly encapsulates many of these issues that people feel most strongly about, some of which you talked about in raising this question. So our Tiger Agenda the T stands for tax reform, for equity, prosperity, and growth. The I stands for infrastructure, befitting a modern mega city. The G stands for government reform. The E stands for education and health systems that the people trust. And the R stands for rule of law and public order. And of course, we have detailed policies in each of these thematic areas. But this agenda essentially focuses on the areas that people are most concerned about, and ultimately that will deliver quality of life. Because at the end of the day, the outcome of governance, the end point of governance, the reason why you have governments in place is to improve the quality of life of the people. It is not to administer budgets. It is not to spend money. I would argue it's not even to build roads or bridges. It is to enhance the quality of life of the people. And if you take Lagos, Lagos is blessed in many ways. One of the ways is that it has, it's been a commercial capital for centuries, really, and has a budget this year of approximately 1.7 trillion, and has spent, adjusted for inflation, probably similar sums, over the last many years. But if you look at the quality of life of the average Lagosian, as measured by, metrics that are maintained by global, rating or ranking agencies, you'll find that Lagos is consistently ranked at the bottom, despite, these expenditures. So one of the arguments that's made is that, well, if you compare us to other states, we're doing okay, but this should not be the comparison for Lagos. So I think it's quite clear that there's a lot that's needed, and we believe that our Tiger agenda will deliver that quality of life, dignity and respect to the average Lagosian, and will actually lay the foundation for a Lagos in the first world.
I think you actually made a good point there when you said that Lagos consistently scores low on the sort of international indices when it's compared to other sort of capitals, not just in Africa, but across the world. But the question, of course, is whether the people in Lagos see you as the person who will come in to change all that. Meanwhile, you mentioned earlier, Mr. Doherty, that to some extent we're still in the throes of the aftermath of the presidential election. How much political devastation, in your assessment, has that left in its wake in Lagos State?
So, I've written about this. I think it was fundamentally a missed opportunity. There's no denying the fact that there's a great deal of, maybe disappointment, some disenchantment, some disillusionment, because the expectation was very high coming into the election. We were promised a lot. And yes, we know that, it's a big logistical challenge and all of that. And we give INEC that, we always sort of acknowledged that to INEC. But we were advocates of this new order. And remember that there were a lot of people who were coming into the system, experiencing the system and engaging with the system for the first time, on the back of, a rise in activism, and sort of translating that into civic engagement through the political process. And so that disappointment that results primarily, in my view, from a failure of leadership at INEC, whether intentional or inadvertent, I think that failure of leadership has dented confidence. Now, having said that, I think that people still fundamentally have this increased sense of taking their destiny in their own hands. We have continued to be advocates of the process. Everybody will be a little bit less sanguine about the process now, and a little bit more focused on ensuring that things are done right, including, one hopes and expects INEC itself and the security agencies. So we I guess, look forward to this election with a cautious optimism that we will have a better outcome in the governorship, recognizing that we've had one bad experience to learn from, and we can do better going forward.
Well, I like the way you encapsulated your expectations from INEC there, obviously couched in very measured assessment, and hoping that the election won't disappoint and disenfranchise Nigerians, including possibly your supporters. But if you were to win the ballot on Saturday, what would you do? The first thing that you'd do if you got into office, what would be top of your in tray?
So, I mean, there are a few things, but one of the things which is central for us is this government reform agenda, because we think that one of the biggest problems that, we faced in Lagos is this governance problem. And if government works in Lagos, many of the other challenges that we face, whether it's in, the tax reform area that I talked about, infrastructure, education, health, etc., most of those things stem from the weaknesses in governance and leadership and the operation of government. So the first thing that we'll do as part of our government reform agenda is to examine the compensation of civil servants and public service officers. Because we believe that it is important that people are reasonably compensated, and ultimately that everybody who works for Lagos state government and serves the citizens of Lagos should have a reasonable compensation to enable them to do that work. Now, and this is not just about saying we'll increase by 10% or whatever. It's about saying what should people earn, and we may not be able to get there immediately, but how do we develop a roadmap to get there? And let's start the process immediately. Now, at the same time as we do that, this is a carrot and stick approach. It's not just a carrot and carrot approach. At the same time we do that, and this is fundamental to the government reform agenda, we're insisting that people approach their responsibilities, the trust that their seats and their public offices represent, with integrity, with diligence, and discharge the trust in the interest of the people. And so we'll strengthen the Attorney General's office and the constituent units within that, including the DPP. We will strengthen the tools of surveillance. We'll strengthen the tools of enforcement, audit. We will ensure that people stick to the rules of the public service rules, including the rules relating to conflicts of interest, which are all in the books, by the way. We don't have to create new rules. We just have to insist that people keep to them. And we will prosecute people who fall short. We will prosecute them diligently. And we will ensure that the rules are followed from the governor's seat, which by the grace of God I will occupy, all the way down to the lowest cadre in the civil service. And we'll ensure that government then begins to work in the interests of the people. And then what will happen is that the actions of government, the actions of public service officers will come into alignment with the interests of the people rather than being self-serving in their decision making. And this will then yield benefits and fruit in terms of the quality of life of the citizens across all policy areas, including things like infrastructure, education, health, etc. So this is just one of many agenda items which I can talk about at length.
Well, it's very interesting, and I also think that a lot of people would agree with you, because one thing that's sorely missing in this country is the rule of law and fidelity to it. I want to thank you very much indeed, Mr. Doherty, for joining us from Lagos, and wish you all the very best on Saturday. And Funso Doherty is the governorship candidate of the African Democratic Congress, or ADC, and he was talking to me there from our studios in Lagos.